Hey, everyone. I never thought I'd find myself writing something like this, but here I am. Sharing my story feels like the only way to make sense of what's been happening. I guess I need to get it out of my system and maybe help someone else avoid what I've been through. Let me start with some context. My name's David, and I've been married to Laura for 8 years. She's the kind of person who lights up a room, confident, sharp-tongued, and always dressed to kill. When we first met, I thought her bluntness was refreshing. She didn't sugarcoat things, and I respected that. Now, that sharp tongue feels like a weapon, and I'm the one constantly dodging the blows. We don't have kids, and for the most part, I thought we were in a decent place. Sure, things weren't as exciting as they used to be, but isn't that normal? Life gets busy, and relationships evolve. At least, that's what I told myself. I was content with how things were, but looking back, I should have paid more attention to the small cracks forming in our marriage. The first sign that something was off came a couple of weeks ago. Laura's work schedule had suddenly gotten erratic. She started coming home later than usual, claiming she was putting out fires at the office. She works in marketing, so tight deadlines and last-minute projects aren't unusual. Still, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. She'd come home exhausted but somehow full of energy for her phone. Her texts to work friends seemed endless, but she brushed it off as necessary networking. "Don't be so dramatic, David," she'd snap if I asked about it. "You don't get how demanding my job is." She was right, I didn't get it. But her defensiveness felt off. It wasn't just her schedule. She was more distant. The little things she used to do, like texting me good morning or surprising me with my favorite snacks, had stopped completely. Conversations felt more like interrogations. When I tried to open up about my concerns, she'd roll her eyes and say I was overthinking things. Then, last Friday, I decided to surprise her. It was something we hadn't done in a while: spontaneity. I thought showing up at her office with plans for a lunch date would remind her of the good times. I even grabbed flowers on the way, feeling stupidly optimistic about rekindling that old spark. But when I got to her office, the receptionist, Melissa, gave me a weird look. "Oh, Laura's out to lunch," she said, a little too casually. I blinked, thrown off. Lunch? With who? Melissa hesitated before shrugging. "Not sure. Some guy, I think. They left about 20 minutes ago." My stomach dropped. "Right?" I mumbled, trying to play it cool. "Thanks." I stepped outside and sat in my car, staring at the bouquet like an idiot. It didn't make sense. Laura never mentioned lunch plans, let alone with another guy. For a moment, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe it was just a colleague. Maybe they were discussing work. But my gut wouldn't let it go. That's when I saw them. Laura, walking back to the office with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, clean-cut, and way too familiar with her. They were laughing, their shoulders brushing as they walked. At one point, he touched her arm. A light, lingering gesture that sent my mind racing. Laura's laughter was different too. It wasn't the polite chuckle she reserved for office small talk. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in years, the kind she used to save for me. I gripped the steering wheel, torn between storming over there and driving away. But I stayed put, watching as they disappeared into the building. When she got home that evening, I asked her how her day went. "Exhausting," she sighed, kicking off her heels. "I barely had time to eat." My heart sank. "Really? You didn't go out for lunch or anything?" She froze for a split second before brushing it off. "Oh, yeah. I grabbed a quick bite with Kevin. Just work stuff." Kevin. A name to go with the face. "You mean your manager?" I asked. "Yeah, him. It wasn't a big deal." Her answer was too smooth, too practiced. My gut screamed that she was lying, but I let it go for now. After all, I didn't have proof. Just a feeling. And what kind of husband accuses his wife of cheating based on a feeling? Looking back, I wish I had trusted my instincts that night. It would have saved me from what came next. After that lunch incident, I couldn't shake the suspicion. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, but every little thing Laura did seem to feed into my doubts. Her phone was suddenly glued to her hand, and she started turning the screen away whenever I walked by. She claimed it was just work stress, but the way she'd smile at her messages said otherwise. I decided not to press her directly. Instead, I started paying closer attention. If something was going on, I wasn't going to confront her empty-handed. A few nights later, I noticed something odd. Laura had always been predictable about her wardrobe, sleek and professional during the day, comfy sweatpants at home. But that day, she left the house in her usual office attire and came home in something completely different. Instead of her fitted blazer and pencil skirt, she walked through the door in a sundress that didn't even look like hers. "Nice outfit," I said, keeping my tone light. "Did you change at work?" She glanced down, clearly caught off guard, then laughed nervously. "Oh yeah, I spilled coffee on my other clothes. Had to borrow this from a coworker." "A coworker? Who?" Laura waved her hand dismissively, avoiding eye contact. "Does it matter?" "One of the girls." Her explanation didn't sit right, but I let it drop. Something about the dress seemed deliberate, like she'd chosen it for someone, not borrowed it out of necessity. It was too flirty, too unlike her usual style. That night, while she showered, I checked her bag. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed answers. Inside, I found a crumpled receipt from a restaurant downtown, the same one she'd supposedly gone to with Kevin. At first, I thought it was harmless, but then I turned it over and saw the handwriting scrawled on the back. "I can't stop thinking about last night." My heart dropped. There was no name, but the words hit me like a freight train. Last night? What the hell had happened last night? Laura's voice broke my thoughts. "David, have you seen my phone charger?" I shoved the receipt back into her bag and zipped it up just as she walked into the room, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Nope," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't seem to notice my unease, but I felt like my chest was about to explode. I needed space, a moment to think. "I'm gonna grab some fresh air," I said, heading for the door. "Don't forget to take out the trash while you're at it," she called after me, her tone sharp. I stepped outside, clutching the door frame as the weight of everything hit me. That note wasn't just friendly. It was intimate. Whoever wrote it had been with her. Recently. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Laura laughing with Kevin, wearing that sundress, holding a note that wasn't meant for me. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was happening, and I needed to figure out exactly what. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Laura's office. A friendly receptionist picked up, and I asked to speak with her manager, Kevin. "He's out right now," she said, "but I can leave a message for you." "That's okay," I replied. "Actually, could you just confirm something for me? I wanted to send him a thank you gift for taking Laura out to lunch the other day. I just can't remember where they went." "Oh," the receptionist said, clearly hesitant. "I'm not sure about that, sir. But I do know they've been going to lunch together a lot lately. Maybe she can tell you?" The words stung, but I managed a polite thanks before hanging up. Lunch together a lot lately. Laura had never mentioned that. She'd made it seem like the lunch I saw was a one-time thing. That evening, I decided to test her. "Hey," I said casually over dinner. "I talked to Melissa at your office today. She mentioned you've been having a lot of lunches with Kevin." Laura froze for half a second before flashing me a tight smile. "Yeah, so? He's my boss. We talk about work stuff." "What kind of work stuff?" I pressed, keeping my tone even. Her irritation flared. "God, David, do you have to micromanage every little thing I do? If you're this insecure, maybe you should see someone about it." I stared at her, stunned by the sudden hostility. She was always quick to deflect, but this was something else. Before I could respond, she grabbed her plate and stormed off to the kitchen. For the first time in our marriage, I realized I didn't know the person sitting across the table from me. After the blow-up at dinner, Laura acted like nothing had happened. The next morning, she kissed me on the cheek and left for work as if we hadn't just had one of the most telling arguments of our marriage. I spent the day trying to push the confrontation out of my mind, but it gnawed at me. She wasn't just defensive. She was hostile, and I couldn't ignore the cracks spreading through our relationship. That night, Laura fell asleep quickly, the exhaustion from her day catching up to her. I watched her for a while, my mind racing with everything I'd seen and suspected. When her breathing slowed into a steady rhythm, I reached for her phone. It was on the nightstand, close enough to her side of the bed that I had to move carefully, making sure not to disturb her. My hands shook as I unlocked it, the faint glow from the screen casting shadows on the walls. The first thing I noticed was that she'd muted notifications from several apps, including her messages. Red flag. My stomach tightened as I opened the messaging app. At first, there wasn't much, just the usual threads with her coworkers and friends. But when I scrolled further, I found a thread labeled Kevin. The conversation was incomplete, with most of the messages on Laura's side deleted, but what was left made my blood run cold. Kevin, lunch was amazing. Seeing you in that dress? Damn. Kevin, can't stop thinking about last night. You're incredible. Kevin, don't forget to delete these messages. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a flirtation. It was a full-blown affair. My hands shook as I snapped screenshots of the messages. I knew they wouldn't hold up as hard evidence since she could claim they were taken out of context, but it was a start. Then, I checked her photos. Nothing incriminating, at least not outright. Just selfies, work events, and random snapshots of her day. But when I opened her recently deleted folder, I found a picture of her and Kevin at a restaurant, the same restaurant from the receipt. They were seated close together, their faces lit up with matching smiles. His arm was draped casually across her shoulder, his fingers brushing her collarbone. She looked happy, happier than she'd been with me in years. I saved the photo and put her phone back before she woke up, but I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did any of our friends know? How far had it gone? The next morning, I made an excuse to leave early for work, but instead, I drove to Laura's office building and parked a block away. It felt wrong, creepy, even, but I needed answers. I wasn't just going to sit around while she played me for a fool. Sure enough, around lunchtime, Laura walked out of the building with Kevin. This time, they didn't even try to hide it. She was wearing another one of those dresses she never wore at home, her hair styled differently, and her makeup a little heavier than usual. They got into his car and drove off. I followed them. My heart pounded the entire way, and I kept a safe distance to avoid being noticed. They pulled into a small Italian bistro tucked away on a quiet street. It wasn't the kind of place Laura and I would have gone to. It was intimate, romantic. I parked across the street and watched them through the restaurant's front window. They were seated in a corner booth, leaning in close as they talked. At one point, Kevin reached across the table and took her hand. Laura didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled, a warm, genuine smile that I hadn't seen in years. That was it. I'd seen enough. When Laura got home that evening, I decided to confront her, but not outright. I wanted to see if she'd lie again, just to confirm what I already knew. "How was your day?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Busy," she said, her tone clipped. "Back-to-back meetings. I didn't even have time to eat." That was all the confirmation I needed. I stared at her, the words burning in my throat, but I held back. She didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing how much she'd hurt me. Not yet. After that dinner where Laura so smoothly lied to my face, I knew I couldn't trust anything she said anymore. I wasn't sure what was more infuriating, her brazenness, or the fact that she thought I was too stupid to notice. But I wasn't going to confront her without everything lined up. I wanted the truth, not excuses or manipulation. The next morning, Laura left early for work, claiming she had a meeting with the regional team. I nodded along, playing the part of the oblivious husband. As soon as she left, I grabbed her laptop. She was signed in, and I knew she had a habit of checking her emails from home. I scrolled through her inbox, my stomach twisting with every subject line. At first, everything looked normal. Work memos, newsletters, and the usual spam. But then I found it. A thread labeled, "Let's talk privately" from Kevin. My chest tightened as I clicked on it. The exchange was brief but damning. "Kevin, can't wait for tonight. Same place?" "Laura, of course. Just text me when you're there." I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. Tonight. So she was planning to see him again. I snapped a photo of the screen with my phone before closing the laptop. I didn't want her to suspect I'd seen anything. Not yet. The rest of the day crawled by. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was elsewhere. When I got home that evening, Laura wasn't there. She'd left a note on the counter. Working late again. Don't wait up. Exo. Liar. I made up my mind right then. I was going to catch her. I grabbed my car keys and drove downtown, stopping a block away from the restaurant where I'd seen her with Kevin before. Sure enough, her car was parked nearby. I didn't have to wait long before I saw them walk in together. This time, I wasn't content to just watch. I followed them in, keeping my distance as they were seated at a secluded corner table. They didn't notice me. I stayed far enough back, blending in with the other patrons. I watched as Kevin leaned in close, his hand brushing Laura's knee under the table. She laughed softly, her cheeks flushing in a way that made my stomach churn. I couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. They weren't colleagues. They weren't friends. This was an affair, plain and simple. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I didn't care how humiliating it felt. It was evidence. Proof. They laughed. They touched. And at one point, Kevin even fed her a piece of dessert from his fork. I had to clench my fists to keep myself from walking over and flipping the table right then and there. But I waited. When they finally left, I followed them outside and watched as they walked to his car. Laura paused before getting in, glancing around like she was worried someone might see. For a moment, I thought she'd spotted me, but she quickly turned back to Kevin. He leaned in and kissed her, right there on the sidewalk. That was it. The final nail in the coffin. When Laura got home later that night, I was waiting for her. She walked through the door with that same fake smile, acting like everything was normal. "Hey," she said, kicking off her heels. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I replied evenly. "Thought I'd wait for you. How was work?" She froze for half a second before recovering. "Busy. Long day. I'm exhausted." "I'll bet," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Italian food does that to you, huh?" Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you, Laura," I said, my tone sharp. "I saw everything. You and Kevin at Casa Bellina. The kissing, the touching, the lies." Her face went pale, but she quickly shifted into defense mode. "You're spying on me now? Jesus, David, that's disgusting." "What's disgusting?" I shot back. "Is you screwing around with your boss and lying to my face about it?" "It's not what you think," she snapped, her voice rising. "He's been going through a rough time, and I was just being supportive." "Supportive? That's your excuse?" I laughed bitterly. "You're supporting him with kisses and romantic dinners? Give me a break, Laura." Her expression hardened. "You've always been so controlling. No wonder I needed someone to talk to. You're impossible." That hit me like a slap. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't denying it. She was flipping it around, making this my fault. I stood up, shaking with anger. "Don't turn this on me. You're the one who cheated. You're the one who destroyed this marriage. Not me." "Maybe it's because this marriage has been dead for years," she yelled, tears streaming down her face. "You don't make me happy anymore, David. Kevin does." The words were a gut punch. For a moment, I just stared at her. The woman I'd built a life with, now a stranger. I didn't say anything else. I turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I didn't go far after storming out of the house. My car was parked at the curb, but I couldn't bring myself to get in. Instead, I leaned against the hood, staring at the darkened windows of my home, the home Laura and I had built together. I should have felt heartbreak, but all I felt was fury. Fury at her lies, her selfishness, her audacity to twist everything into my fault. After a while, I drove. No destination, just aimless turns through empty streets. My mind was a mess of thoughts, each one angrier than the last. By the time I pulled into the lot of a 24-hour diner, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to let Laura walk all over me. If she wanted to play games, she'd learn the hard way that I wasn't someone to mess with. The first thing I did when I sat down at the booth was pull out my phone. I scrolled through the photos and videos I'd taken of her and Kevin, my anger simmering with every image. This was more than enough to prove what she was doing. But I didn't just want to prove it. I wanted to make sure there was no way she could weasel out of this. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I didn't trust myself to keep it together in the office, and besides, I had other plans. I started by organizing all the evidence I had gathered. screenshots of messages, photos from her phone, the video of her and Kevin at the restaurant. Then I moved on to research. It turns out Kevin isn't as private as he thinks. A quick dive into his social media profiles gave me everything I needed: his wife's name, Erin, and a few photos of their two kids. Perfect. I didn't feel bad about involving her, not after what he and Laura had done. She deserved to know the truth, just as much as I deserved my revenge. That evening, Laura came home late again. She barely glanced at me as she dropped her bag by the door and headed for the kitchen. "I'm not in the mood for drama tonight," she said over her shoulder. I followed her in, leaning against the counter as she poured herself a glass of wine. "We need to talk," she sighed, not even bothering to hide her irritation. "What now, David?" I pulled my phone from my pocket and placed it on the counter between us. "I think Erin deserves to know what her husband's been up to." Her face went white. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. "You wouldn't." "I would," I said flatly. "And I will, unless you're honest with me." "No more lies, Laura. Tell me everything." She hesitated, her hand tightening around the stem of her glass. "Fine," she said eventually. "You want the truth? Kevin and I have been seeing each other. It started a few months ago. I didn't mean for it to happen, but—" "But what?" I snapped. "You just tripped and fell into his bed?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "You don't get it, David. I've been miserable. You stopped caring about me a long time ago. Kevin, he makes me feel alive." I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, hollow sound. "So your solution was to cheat? To sneak around like a coward instead of talking to me? What would have been the point?" she shot back. "You never listen. You're too busy obsessing over your own life to notice anything's wrong." I wanted to yell, to argue, but what was the point? She was twisting everything again, trying to make me feel like the bad guy. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. "Well," I said coldly, "you'll have plenty of time to feel alive when you're packing your things. I want you out of here by the weekend." Laura's jaw dropped. "You're kicking me out? You can't just throw me out of my own house." "It stopped being your house when you decided to screw your boss instead of fixing your marriage," I said, my voice steady. "And if you try to fight me on this, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've been doing." Her face twisted in fury, but she didn't argue. She stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I heard the lock click, but I didn't care. I'd said what I needed to say. The next day, I contacted Erin. I wasn't sure how she'd take it, but I felt like she deserved the truth. I sent her an email, attaching the photos and videos with a short message. "Hi, Erin. I think you should know what your husband has been doing. I'm sorry you have to find out this way." I didn't hear back immediately, but I didn't need to. Just knowing that Kevin's perfect little life was about to implode was enough for now. 2 days after I sent Erin the email, I got a reply. Short, direct, and absolutely brutal. Subject: "Thank you for letting me know." Body: "This confirms what I've suspected for weeks. I'll be handling this immediately." No apologies, no questions, just that. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering what handling this meant. I didn't care. Not really. It wasn't my problem. Whatever hellstorm Erin unleashed on Kevin was well-deserved. Meanwhile, Laura had been eerily quiet. The weekend came and went, and she hadn't packed a single box. She spent most of her time locked in the bedroom or glued to her phone, probably trying to figure out how to salvage her mess. I wasn't about to let her stall indefinitely. Monday morning, I decided to light a fire under her. I walked into the bedroom while she was still in bed, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up, her face a mask of irritation. "What do you want?" "I want you out," I said, crossing my arms. "You've had all weekend and nothing's packed. If you don't start moving your stuff today, I'll call a locksmith and change the locks myself." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't just kick me out like this. I have rights, David." "Not when it comes to cheating," I snapped. "If you want to fight me on this, go ahead. But don't forget, I have evidence. You might win a few weeks here, but when this goes to court, you'll lose a hell of a lot more than the house." She opened her mouth to argue, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, she threw back the covers and stomped into the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. It wasn't a victory, but it was a start. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Erin. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it that made it clear she wasn't calling for pleasantries. "I confronted Kevin," she said without preamble. "He didn't deny it." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." "Don't be," she replied. "I'm glad I know the truth. I've already contacted a lawyer. He'll be hearing from me soon." There was a long pause before she added, "And thank you for telling me. I don't know how much longer I would have let him lie to my face." "No one deserves that," I said simply. We ended the call on a surprisingly civil note. Erin wasn't the enemy in this. She was just another victim of Kevin and Laura's selfishness. Still, knowing she was taking action brought me a sense of satisfaction I hadn't expected. Kevin's perfect image was crumbling, and Laura's wasn't far behind. The next blow came the following day when Laura got home from work, her face pale and drawn. She dropped her bag by the door and stared at me with wide, panicked eyes. "Did you send anything to Erin?" she demanded. I raised an eyebrow. "What if I did?" "You idiot," she hissed. "Kevin just got demoted. He told me his boss found out about us, and now HR is involved." "Good," I said coldly. "You both deserve it." Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You're ruining my life, David." "No, Laura," I said, my voice hard. "You ruined your own life the second you decided to cheat. Don't put this on me." She stormed off, but this time, it felt different. There was no anger in her steps, just fear. I almost felt a twinge of pity for her. Almost. As the days went by, the fallout continued. I heard through the grapevine that Kevin was under investigation for violating company policy. Laura's name wasn't mentioned directly, but her connection to the scandal was obvious. People started whispering behind her back at work, and her social media accounts went suspiciously quiet. She finally started packing that week. Every time I saw her carrying a box to her car, I felt a small weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just about her leaving. It was about reclaiming my space, my life. By the time she moved out completely, the house felt empty. Not in a bad way, though. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I spent that evening sitting on the couch with a beer in hand, staring at the empty living room. It was quiet, peaceful, and, above all, mine. But the story wasn't over yet. I still had a divorce to settle, and I wasn't about to let Laura walk away unscathed. With Laura finally out of the house, I had some breathing room to focus on the next step, the divorce. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be simple. Laura wasn't the type to go quietly, and I knew she'd fight me for whatever she thought she could take. The day after she moved out, I met with my lawyer, Helen. She was sharp, no nonsense, and exactly the kind of person I needed on my side. "Infidelity is going to work in your favor," she said as she flipped through the folder of evidence I'd brought. "The photos, the video, the messages, this is solid. It establishes her behavior clearly, and courts don't take kindly to cheaters." I nodded, feeling a small surge of relief. At least I wasn't going into this empty-handed. "Do you have any joint accounts?" she asked, jotting notes on a legal pad. "Just one," I replied. "Savings. I've already moved my paycheck into a separate account." "Smart," she said, giving me a nod of approval. "We'll file immediately. With the evidence you have, I doubt she'll want to drag this out, but if she does, we're ready." The thought of going to court wasn't exactly appealing, but knowing Helen had my back made it less daunting. Laura had already taken enough from me. I wasn't going to let her take more. A week later, Laura was served with the divorce papers. She called me that evening, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. "What the hell, David?" she snapped. "You're filing already? We haven't even talked about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I said calmly. "You cheated. This is the consequence." "I made a mistake," she shouted. "Does that mean you just throw away everything we built together?" "You made your choice, Laura," I replied. "Now I'm making mine." The line went silent for a moment before she hissed, "Fine. If this is how you want to play it, don't expect me to make it easy for you." I wasn't surprised. Laura had always been combative when she didn't get her way. But this time, I wasn't backing down. Things escalated quickly. Laura hired a lawyer of her own, a smug, condescending guy named Alan who seemed to think he could bully me into a settlement. David, He said during our first meeting. Laura is willing to be reasonable. She's asking for the house and a portion of the savings. Considering the circumstances, that's fair. I couldn't help but laugh. Fair? She cheated. Alan. She doesn't get to reasonably take the house she destroyed with her lies. Let's keep this civil, he said, though the smirk on his face made me want to punch it off. Helen leaned forward, her tone icy. The evidence is clear, Mr. Randall. Your client is in no position to make demands. If you want to settle, you'll need to revise your offer significantly. Alan's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. We'll see what the court thinks. That was the last straw. If Laura wanted to fight dirty, I was ready to play hardball. The weeks leading up to the hearing were tense. Laura kept trying to contact me, alternating between tearful apologies and angry outbursts. I ignored most of her calls, letting her words go straight to voicemail. It was a relief to have Helen handling the bulk of the communication. Meanwhile, I started reaching out to mutual friends, quietly letting them know what had happened. Most of them were shocked, some outright disgusted by Laura's actions. A few tried to stay neutral, but it was clear that her reputation had taken a serious hit. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. I walked into the courtroom with Helen by my side, feeling a mix of nerves and resolve. Laura was already there, looking polished but strained. Alan sat beside her, his expression confident. I hated him immediately. The judge listened patiently as both sides presented their arguments. Helen laid out the evidence meticulously, emphasizing Laura's infidelity and the impact it had on our marriage. Alan tried to downplay it, arguing that our financial assets should still be split equally, but the judge wasn't buying it. Given the circumstances, the judge said, addressing Laura directly, you're lucky Mr. David is not pursuing additional damages. The evidence clearly shows a breach of marital trust. I see no reason to grant you a greater share of the assets. I felt a wave of relief as the gavel came down. The house was mine, the savings were mine, and Laura's attempts to manipulate the situation had failed spectacularly. Outside the courthouse, Helen turned to me with a rare smile. Congratulations. You handled that better than most. Thanks, I said, feeling the weight of months of tension finally start to lift. I couldn't have done it without you. That's what I'm here for, she replied. Now, go enjoy your life. She's not your problem anymore. That evening, I sat in the empty house with a glass of whiskey, savoring the quiet. The legal battle was over, and for the first time in months, I felt truly free. Laura might have tried to destroy my life, but she hadn't succeeded. Now, it was time to rebuild. The morning after the court hearing, I woke up feeling strangely numb. The house was finally mine, the legal battle over, but the aftermath still lingered like smoke after a fire. I wasn't naive enough to think things would magically get better overnight. Healing would take time and effort. As I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from Aaron. Aaron, heard the news. Glad it went in your favor. How are you holding up? Me? Honestly? Relieved it's over. Thanks for asking. I hesitated before typing out another message. Me? How about you? Her response came quickly. Aaron, not great. Kevin's staying at a friend's place, begging me for another chance. But it's over. The kids hate him, and I can't even look at him without feeling sick. I stared at her message for a while, unsure how to respond. Part of me felt vindicated. Kevin deserved every bit of fallout coming his way. But another part of me understood the pain behind her words. She was picking up the pieces, just like I was. Me, if you ever need to talk, I'm here. Aaron, same goes for you. We didn't ask for this, but we'll get through it. It was a simple exchange, but it reminded me that I wasn't alone in this mess. That afternoon, I decided it was time to purge the house of Laura's presence. The photos, her clothes, the little decorative pieces she insisted on buying. All of it had to go. I packed everything into boxes, loading them into my car and dropping them off at a donation center. The house felt strange afterward, empty, yet lighter. For the first time in weeks, it felt like mine again. Despite the progress, nights were still the hardest. Lying in bed alone, the memories crept in. Laura's laughter with Kevin, the lies she spun so easily, the kiss I'd witnessed outside that restaurant. The anger and betrayal were like old friends I couldn't shake. That's when I decided to try therapy. Walking into the therapist's office for the first time was daunting. I wasn't sure what to expect or how much I'd even be able to say. But Dr. Carlisle had a calm, patient demeanor that made it easier to open up. I just keep asking myself, why? I admitted during one session. Why wasn't I enough? Why did she have to destroy everything we built? Dr. Carlisle nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes it's not about you. It's about them, their insecurities, their selfishness. Laura's actions weren't a reflection of your worth, David. They were a reflection of hers. Hearing it framed that way hit differently. For so long, I'd been blaming myself, replaying every argument and wondering what I could have done differently. But Dr. Carlisle was right. Laura's betrayal wasn't my fault, it was hers. A few weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. To my surprise, it was Laura. "Hey," she said, her voice hesitant. "What do you want, Laura?" I asked bluntly. I wanted to apologize," she said, "for everything. I know I messed up, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it." Her words felt rehearsed, but there was a vulnerability in her tone that made me pause. For the first time, she sounded like she actually understood the damage she'd done. "I appreciate the apology," I said after a long silence, "but I don't think about us the way I used to. You made your choices, and I've made mine." She sniffled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. "I'm glad you're moving on, David. You deserve better than what I gave you." "Thanks," I said simply. "Take care of yourself, Laura." "You too." When I hung up, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just closure. For the first time, it felt like the chapter was truly over. That night, as I sat on the couch with a beer, I looked around the house and smiled. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild on my terms. And for the first time in months, I felt ready. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.